Got an idea for a topic? Email us at newsmakers@KRLA870.com. That's newsmakers@KRLA870.com. Sunday Morning Newsmakers with Larry Marino. AM 870, The Answer.
Riding an Uber or Lyft could cost you more in LA County. The Metro Transportation Authority is looking at all of its options to try to mitigate congestion, including regulating or taxing ride-sharing drivers or riders. We're going to talk about this story and what it means with the Communications Director for Citizens Against Government Waste. And to do that, we go to our phone and talk with Curtis Kalin. Curtis, good to meet you. Good to have you on the program.
Oh, it's great to be on. Thank you.
So at first, you hear the story about, okay, it's another resource to tax. And then I peel back the layers more, deeper into the story, and they say, well, the city and the county and the state have invested in all this traditional architecture, buses and rail and all these things. And guess what? As Uber and Lyft have come in, the disruptors have taken the business. People are now riding the neater, more fun way with their apps. It's convenient, and leaving the rest of us as taxpayers holding the bag. So it's kind of a bigger story than just grabbing some more money. The county and the city and the state are saying, well, wait a second, somebody's got to offset the costs to those in the community who made the investment in the traditional transit systems. Walk into the story and help us understand what they're talking about, what you think is going on, how you deal with stuff like this. Because, hey, disruptors seem to be the lay of the land. I didn't ride an Uber or Lyft for years, and then I got one of those apps on the phone, and it's really easy to do. And, you know, I don't want to ride a bus if I don't have to, right?
Exactly, and that's exactly the point. And that's why I think our position usually is that taxes on successful industries end up just hurting consumers and obviously the drivers as well, because it makes the rides more expensive and it drives down the amount that drivers can earn. So it's a lose-lose for consumers and the people driving for Uber and Lyft. I understand the local politician angle, but I think it just shows the issues with when you have politicians looking in the rearview mirror and trying to preserve old, perhaps outmoded methods of transportation and other methods like that, when in reality you should be looking through the forward mirror, obviously, and figuring out how we can incentivize these new technologies and not try to hurt them. That should be the priority.
Yeah. So instead of making a commitment to, by golly, we built all this track and we have all these buses, it ought to be about, wait a second, you know, this convenience thing is great. We don't have to have all these buses anymore. We don't have to invest in government infrastructure. Let the private sector have it. But that's not what they're arguing to do, is it?
Worse yet, they would take the money from this proposed tax and then give it to the more outmoded, old, I call it bygone bureaucracies. I mean, you give it to them and you take from the successful. I mean, it would be the equivalent, something like, of putting a cap on Netflix subscriptions because Blockbusters were closing a couple years ago. Let's impose regulations on the Ford Model T to prop up horse and buggies because, my goodness, we're losing an older, outmoded form of transportation. Again, that's just backwards thinking, and we should be incentivizing the future, not trying to preserve the past.
They would argue something like, well, somebody's got to pay for it, and if people aren't riding the bus, then we're going to have to dip into the general fund and take tax dollars from everybody and put it toward transportation. That leaves less money for other things. In other words, the old fungibility of money, that you can move it around, but ultimately the taxpayers will take the hit. Let me play devil's advocate. I mean, I agree with you, but they would say something like, well, gee, is that fair to we're going to keep this rail anyway. We've already invested in the tracks. When you buy something, it's a 20, 30, 40-year commitment to it. We look at the big picture. Ubers come and go. Technology changes. But why would we abandon our rail lines, or why would we abandon our buses just because this upstart came along?
I think there will always be folks who want to take rail or take buses. But again, I think there's just a fundamental principle here that you simply cannot jump on every new industry that comes along, take it down,
Right.
or try to tamp it down for the sake of propping up something that is 30, 40, 50 years old.
Well, there certainly have been examples that have failed over the years. I remember, wasn't somebody talking about taxing us by emails and putting some sort of search?
That one's a little before my time, but
Okay.
that's pretty crazy.
There was somebody who thought of taxing individual emails because obviously the post office loses out and therefore take the money and prop that up. We really are in a time where disruptors, new technologies are making things outdated so quickly that it's scary who ends up holding the bag on it. And you're right, if those governments are going to entrench themselves and try to prop up the old ones just because, it's going to be tough, isn't it?
Yeah, well, big time. I mean, and I think now on the positive side, I mean, this is societally, this is fantastic in terms of Uber and Lyft. You have Americans that are willing and eager to engage in the sharing of their own goods and services for the benefit of everyone. New innovations and like this are becoming the bedrock of like 21st century America. And to try to hurt that and to try to tamp that down, it just is a terrible precedent to set. And all it does is hurt the people. All those are consumers, the people who ride and drive for Uber and Lyft.
Well, and there's other threats that come along that do this, and governments get caught in them, and lawsuits get filed. There's a big story called the Dynamax decision that's roiling through a lot of the gig economy, this economy where you wait to use your app when an order comes through and then you do the work, defining what is and is not an independent contractor and what is and is not an hourly worker. And I don't know what the motives are, but there are some who think it is to decimate this economy in ways that we can't understand yet, and they're going to use the law to do it.
There was actually a study in 2018, I think, by the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. They did a study on Uber and Lyft, and they found that drivers actually earn almost $15 an hour. And everyone around the country is wanting $15 an hour minimum wage, and that's what these drivers basically earn, and they can earn it when they want it. They can work on and off. They can have schedules that are flexible. I mean, it's the ultimate in worker freedom in a way. You get a great wage, and you can work whenever you want. Isn't that what everybody kind of wants? And again, to look at that and say, well, this is a problem. We must act to tamp this down. It's just completely backwards economic thinking.
I share this story my father once told me years ago. He grew up at a time when things really were in transition as well. And believe it or not, here in Southern California, there was, as he would describe it, a cart being drawn by a donkey going up and down the streets of Los Angeles when he was a very young child. And he said they would deliver ice that would go into an ice box, and that's how things were done. And then suddenly electricity came along and the new technology, people could get a refrigerator. And this man who drew this cart with a donkey had a big sign on the side that a block of ice never wears out or never breaks down. It was some sort of phrase. He was trying to justify himself without adapting as he hung on to the old technology. I get the feeling the same thing. It's just human nature to do that, right?
Right. I mean, and this underscores why I think our view typically is that local, state, or federal governments shouldn't get invested in certain technologies this deeply, just because they get stuck. And the pace of change technologically is so incredibly fast nowadays that it's impossible. When you start a project, if it's a 10-year project, the technology you start with, there's no way it'll be the same technology you end with.
No, we haven't even
to lock yourself in.
Yeah,
bad.
We haven't even brought up the boondoggle of the so-called high-speed rail project that voters approved out here that was supposed to take you from L.A. to San Francisco in a brisk amount of time. And that apparently is not happening and not going to happen. At least there's some confusion about it. But Gavin Newsom, the new mayor, is really only going to commit to a leg between Bakersfield and Merced. And not that that's not a good thing, but it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And it's morphed into a jobs project to help the people of that community who, live in poverty. And And that's not right either, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, again, it goes back to when government bureaucracies get in and lead. When they lead these projects, inevitably they get stuck with old thinking. And that's exactly what happens here, where they have this huge project, and it's about 2008, correct? I think it was 2008.
Yeah, 2008.
This was voted in.
Yeah.
And so, more than 10 years later, the whole thing is completely different because the parameters are different, the needs are different. Technology and society is moving so quickly. It's really a dangerous proposition when governments get in and try to make longer-term plans. That's why you have private sector folks that can adapt very quickly on a dime and not have to rely on the pace of government.
Yet as I understand it, in the so-called Green New Deal, there is this call to eliminate air travel and to shift to a rail system. Talk about timing here. You have California acknowledging it can't do this. It can't do it reasonably. It can't do it at cost. People wouldn't ride it if they built it because the ticket would be too expensive. And yet this is the vision of those who think that's where the future should go if we're talking about the environment. Right, and then that's another. You're right. It's a terrible timing for them, and right. It's just backwards. It's just 100% backwards, and there are ways to keep the planet clean through the same innovation that gets us Uber and Lyft. That there's the secret that no one wants to talk about is that American carbon emissions have gone down over the last 10, 15 years. And it has nothing to do with government regulation, and there's everything to do with innovation in these industries. They have found a way to make it less dirty, and I would bet money on the American ingenuity of our private sector to figure out how to make things cleaner, right? Not
as opposed to government forcing you to do it. A big government hand. We'll tax you here. We'll force away aviation there. We'll make you be on rail, no matter what it costs. Well, good conversation. I want to thank you so much for being with us. Curtis Kalin joining us to talk a bit about this from Citizens Against Government Waste. All right. Thanks for having me on. Take care now. Bye-bye.
AM 870, The Answer.
Up next, the Barack Lurie Show, hosted by attorney Barack Lurie. The very popular Barack Lurie Show is filled with stimulating conversation and a fresh point of view on politics, religion, and the law. Next on AM 870, The Answer.
Sunday Morning Newsmakers with Larry Marino.